Welcome to American Dialectic with Jake and Joe, and we want to talk about the elephant in the room, the big R, racism.
Yeah, I think that if you're talking about subjects that most people on the right are uncomfortable with or want to avoid, racism would be the one.
Until they actually are the racist.
Yeah. Well, until somebody accuses them of it and they don't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we're talking about this racism with Republicans,
not Republicans, the right.
Yeah, the right in general, I suppose. The place to start is with inherent bias, and it's something that we all have.
Mm-hmm.
It's. I think that a lot of people want to believe that they're not racist or they don't judge people off of certain things, but we all do. And there's not.
Oh yeah.
I would say that there's really not much that we can do about it, except for to be aware of it and try to fight it when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think. Do you want to give us a couple examples, Jake?
All right. One of my favorite go-to examples is when you actually go ahead and let's say that you have a kid and you want to take him to soccer practice. And you have the choice between a black coach or a white coach, and you're personally white. You might hesitate for a few seconds at the even idea of leaving your children with a black coach. That would be a personal bias thing, and you might actually turn around and just opt to not associate due to fears of being accused of racism, but accidentally exposing yourself as clearly having a bias. Right. And there's a lot of unconscious things that we actually go ahead and do that. For example, if you go down to the bank, you want to deposit some money, you might have a black teller, and you might see that he becomes available. You might hesitate for a couple of seconds. Some people do that, and it might be due to their experiences with black people, or they might actually not like black people in general. But that's a couple of internal biases, things that we don't even really notice.
Right, and I think it extends past just race too, because there's an example that's come up before of having a female plumber. You know, you have a plumbing problem, you call a plumber, and a woman shows up, and you might think to yourself, "Oh, well, I mean, it's a girl plumber, she knows." Mm-hmm. So, and I know that I guarantee there's people at home going, "I would never do that sitting at home." But take an inventory. Mm-hmm. Think about something where you have just met somebody, no matter what their creed, race, color, any of that is, and you judge them in that moment because of one immutable characteristic. Yeah. You know, and I'll bet you'll find something. I know that I've found a few in my life, especially when I work construction when I was younger. I've talked about that a couple times. We've had women that have come on, especially doing roofing or demolition, and I think
I thought women avoided that work.
Yeah, they're not going to.
That's one of my bias.
Right, they're not good at. She's not going to be able to output like the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And there have been cases where I was right and cases where I was wrong. And the point on that, I think, is that you have to stop and look at people individually. Mm-hmm. You know, it's to judge somebody just off of one characteristic is literally judging a book by its cover, or looking and reading a few chapters into a book and saying, "Oh, this whole book is trash." Mm-hmm. You know.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. And handling that internal bias is something that's very difficult, and it's something where you have to make a conscious choice every single step of the way. And you know what? I think that the left gives the right a lot of flack for those small minor transgressions. People are people. They're set in their ways, and you know what? Sure, those things are minor and they can be hurtful at times, but to just label someone outright racist or sexist in that regards is kind of unfair, and you're fighting the wrong people. These people just want to be left alone as much as you do, and to just go to war with them over that seems to be a real waste of effort. But we have to acknowledge, at minimum, that there are genuine, hardcore racists and sexists out there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's one thing to go ahead and just make a very subtle race joke or subtle sex joke and kind of just go, ha-ha, hoo-hoo, oh well. That kind of stuff is very, very minor. And I laugh at them all the time. I'm unashamed in laughing at those jokes, but I also recognize that they're terrible. But it's a whole different ball game as soon as you say, we must hang the N-word.
Yeah. I think, and we might differ a little bit on this, I think off-color jokes can be hateful. Now, there's something that I've always had to keep in mind is that not everybody has the same level of emotional stability. Mm-hmm. You know, as to where you could probably make fun of anything about me as a person that you want to.
But you won't take it personally.
Yeah, I may or may not take it personally. It always depends on the day and what's going on. For example, my parents are both passed. You know what I mean? Coming and talking about my mother, and she's dead. That might be something that hurts me. So that's an example of a different level of emotional stability on a given subject. When you're talking about, especially I would say, black people in America, that would be the most. I can understand why most people don't understand why that's such a sore subject to make racist jokes, because I think a lot of people think that, oh, well, we all have to take it. Well, I think in that regard, when you're talking about black people in America, they've been taking it for a long time, and I don't think that they want to keep taking it. And that's something that whether you're
That's
white,
reasonable.
White, black, or indifferent, whatever race, whatever sex, you should respect that. That's
They can't change that.
Yeah, they can't change it.
And there's nothing to fix.
I mean, we could get into a whole topic of cultural memory and how that kind of thing affects people. So I would really just say to be cautious when you're making those kinds of those jokes. And then the second thing, when you're talking about overt, blatant racism,
unapologetic,
unapologetic racism. It is still out there, but I like to think that it's dwindling. It's hard to say for sure because those types of people tend to be very reclusive.
Oh, I think that you are a little wrong in that regards, because what has changed in the last 25 years was the advent of the internet, where these recluses, I agree with you, they were originally recluses, but the internet gives them a microphone or loudspeaker, and they're able to go ahead and find other people that think like them and realize, hey, I'm not alone in this, and naturally people will find their own forms of validation. They don't have to, as formally, actually integrate with the community, learn who the people are, and realize, okay, maybe I was wrong. And that is a massive problem. And somehow, somewhere, a lot of right-wingers, both self-proclaimed, some not, are just labeled as racist, rightfully so. But we need to definitely say it exists and it's a problem. How do we handle that, considering that they may be in the right-wing camp, despite the fact that you and I say, no, you are not us.
Yeah. I think that most Republicans would say that far right is not part of the Republican Party. They wouldn't include them in their discussions. But actually, this conversation makes me think of when we were talking last week with Mr. Sims, Aaron Sims, when he was talking about Black Bloc and how that's executed, and how they go and they find the racists and then they dox them and how that whole operation works. But then he talks about there being no leadership within Antifa too. I think that's because I think that's the real problem. We hit on something saying that I think everybody agrees blatant racism is a bad thing. You know what I mean?
And how do you beat it?
And that tactic of outing racists for racists is very effective. But the problem is, who's deciding who's a racist? Like we were talking about, I think a lot of people that just have an unconscious bias toward one group or another are being labeled as outright bigoted, outright racist, and they're not really the same thing. I don't even think they're equatable. Yes, and I may think more than you that it's inappropriate to make jokes like that, and everybody may have different varying degrees of thought on that. But the fact that you're doxing people with implicit bias and giving them the full bigot treatment is.
Oh yeah, it's one thing to go, okay, dude, what the heck, that joke is really insensitive, and you can have that discussion if you want. But to just harp on that person and treat him as a full-blown bigot, that's definitely a problem. And when you dox someone that just might make off-color jokes or might have, as you said, implicit bias, and giving them that full treatment, that is when there's a problem. Because what happens with certain bigots, if you go down to a KKK rally and say, you guys are racist, I'm sure they'll look around and go, and?
Yeah, exactly.
You're that kind of, the clue is kind of in our historical name.
Right. It reminds me of just, with Aaron Sims, it reminds me of the movie The Patriot. You ever seen that?
I saw bits and pieces.
With Mel Gibson.
Bits and pieces.
Speaking of overtly racist people. There's a scene where he's sitting with the general. This cat's getting me. There's a scene.
Cat's on set.
Yeah. there's a scene where he's sitting with the English commander, and they're talking about different tactics. And one of the things that he was using as in guerrilla tactics was specifically targeting officers to put the army into disarray.
Destroy morale.
Right. And one of the things that the English officer brought up, he said, listen, you got to stop shooting officers. Officers are necessary to command men and sometimes restrain them, the typical foot soldiers. And while they had their disagreements on that, but it's a very valid point, is with no leaders, there's no restraint on who's getting doxxed, on who's getting attacked. And lots of innocent people are. And I understand that foot soldiers are overzealous. They always are. They're
fanatics.
Yeah, they're fanatics. They're supposed to be that way. But there always needs to be a general or a commander or even
Someone
just a big brother.
Says, I oversaw this. It was a mistake. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this guy's a dick, not a racist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and but it's okay to say, that person is a total cocksucker. Yeah. And shoot him out of a cannon and go ahead and condemn him for some of his views. But at the same time, recognize if he's feeling offended of being accused of being a racist, then the clue might be he really might not be a racist.
Yeah, maybe he has things, or she has things that they need to personally, work on. Mm-hmm. Maybe they have implicit bias that are pretty extreme, and they need to work on that. They're not aware of it.
And it might be just an exposure problem.
Right.
They might not even know better.
Yeah, it could just be that one segment that you saw. It was a dumb racist thing that they said, but that's all you know about the person, and so they're racist. You never know. I think there were some examples of that with I believe it was Jonathan Haidt when they had their whole not Jonathan Haidt. It was, gosh, I'm so bad with names. Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein, when they were doing the Day of Absence. And this is somebody that's championed all these left-wing causes for his entire life. But he had a disagreement. One disagreement.
A singular
disagreement. A single disagreement. And they cannibalized him for it. Everything he's ever done is wiped off the table because of this one thing that the public found out about.
Weinstein is with the Evergreen incident.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
All right. And that Day of Absence was all white people off campus.
Correct. Yeah.
Including faculty.
Yeah, which is a whole nother conversation we could get into, but
we're here to talk about the right wing
and the implicit bias. So, but I think that pretty much covers it. I can't.
Well, still, how do we go ahead and handle it? It's one thing to acknowledge it, but it's another thing to deal with these racists. I think that's a problem that. How do we go ahead and expose not expose them, but expose them to how other people happen to live and get them to treat other human beings as individuals, not as a collective. And that's the problem with these certain right-wing extremists. They think as a collective. They organize people based off of collectives.
Right.
And they condemn people as collectives. And they try to group other people who do not agree with them, don't want anything to do with them as, oh, you're part of our collective, whether you like it or not. No.
Right.
No, I'm an individual.
Well,
how do we solve this?
I don't know that there's, when you're talking about social engineering, I don't know that there's any long-term, permanent solution to this.
But social engineering, we don't want that.
Well, that's what you said, is how can we make them? And
how can I take personal responsibility?
That's the ticket. That is the ticket right there, is that has to come from each individual. How do I take personal responsibility? You have to take personal responsibility for yourself. That's what personal is in the personal. You have to make your own inventory. If you are guilty of implicit bias, and we all are, you have to call yourself out on it. And that's the first step. There's
nothing wrong in admitting failure.
Not at all.
There's a beauty to it.
You can't progress without understanding that you've failed, that you've had a problem, that you have a problem. And that goes for everybody. And I mean, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, alike. All of them have their bias, and they all call each other out on it. When it's just like with philanthropy and communism, there's a difference. You can't force somebody to think differently. You can't force somebody to give their stuff up. They have to choose to do it. That's why I make the philanthropy and communism distinction. In our society, if you make money, you can choose to share with the poor people. But the moment somebody tells you to share, I don't have to share if I don't want to. It's my stuff. I don't know you. Yeah. So it's the same concept when you're talking about personal inventory and who you are as a person. If you have faults, you have to sit down, you have to examine them, and you have to figure out what your problems are. And then you have to make the effort to change. And that's a lot of work. I realize that. But if we're talking about how we can achieve a better world where we can treat each other better, That's step one. And that needs to come from left, right, and center. That's everybody. Figure out who you are as a person and where your faults are. And that's in my mind, a lifelong struggle. You'll never win that battle.
Well, unless if you're willing to at least give it a try. One of my favorite examples of actually saving some of these people from themselves was this one particular black man. I forget his name off the top of my head, but I'll go ahead and link it in the description later. But what he actually went ahead and did is he would actually reach out to members of the KKK. And he would make a strong, solid effort to actually not only befriend them, but make a lifelong friend out of them.
An athlete, I believe. I don't remember who it was, but I remember hearing the story.
And I've heard that he saved like 100 plus KKK members, and they gave up their robes and they made a friend with a black man. And it comes down to he was strong enough and brave enough. He took personal responsibility to go, why do you hate me? Would you like to get to actually know me?
Right. Well, and that's just like you talked about. It's regional in that specific, in a lot of those instances. These people had not met a black man. They had only known what they'd been told. I'll tell you a quick anecdote because I love telling stories. Okay. I had a friend named, we'll call him Mr. Eddie for now. Mr. Eddie was a Vietnam veteran. I believe for 3 weeks he was in Vietnam, but that's neither here nor there. A very strong man, a very focused man, and a very driven man, at least in his younger years. He went over, overseas, and he found himself a nice little Vietnamese girl while he was over there, and he stayed the night at her house. And at midnight, she came to him. She says, "Oh my gosh, you have to go." He says, "Why?" He says, "Well, because," she says, "at midnight, black people grow tails, right?" Now, this to me seems like an overtly racist statement, but she did not believe her. She was sleeping with a black man. She was in love with this man. They made plans of marriage. It never happened, but it was something they were really in love with this. She's not an overtly racist person. She had been told this her entire life. And in Vietnam, she'd never seen a black man.
Oh, man.
She believed it, and
unquestionably.
Unquestionably, because that's all she'd ever heard. So she believed this. That's when we're talking about implicit bias, and back to that story with the sports figure, I forget who his name was. Just meeting a person of the other side and seeing that they're a normal human.
I don't think it's a matter of sides. It's just seeing and knowing something that you've never truly experienced.
Well, from their perspective is what I mean. Somebody that you've never interacted with. Imagine there was a race of space aliens, that came down, and everybody told you, oh yeah, they have a fourth arm that pokes out of their back. You might believe that if you've never met one until you meet one, and he says, "We only have 3 arms. What are you talking about?" So you never know.
That's completely fair.
So if you grew up in white person Kentucky, you may not have ever met a black man. So I don't really have much more to say on the subject. If you want to know how to take accountability, go study Peterson. You know what I mean? Jordan Peterson. Yeah, he'll teach you all you need to know about how to be a better human being, how to pick up and carry a load that you can handle. And then take a little bit more, and a little bit more every day. Just take a little more than you can. And personal inventory, it's all there. 12 Rules for Life. If you want to read a good book, read that one.
Highly recommend it.
Yep.
Anyways, I think you're right. There's not really much more to say, but beyond future discussions of strategy.
Yeah, and fuck overt racism. Fuck overt racist. Like I just can't stress it enough. Identity politics is bad enough. To add race politics to it is ridiculous.
Completely agree.
I think we're done.
All right.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.